All right, everyone. Welcome, everyone. We are live. Once again, I'm Don Irvine for Accuracy in America. I'm joined once again by Cheryl Chumley, the online opinion editor of the Washington Times. Welcome, Cheryl. Thank you for joining me.
It's great to be with you as always. Thanks for having me.
All right. So just before we started, we were talking about a little bit about the quote infrastructure bill
Right. Slash climate change. Yeah.
slash climate change. Yeah, I mean, the Wall Street Journal had an editorial the other day saying, it's basically the Green New Deal in disguise. It's just been amazing that, we've been watching this thing for the last week and a half or 2 weeks, whatever, just how the Democrats trying to figure out a way, particularly Biden administration, how they're trying to define this, as infrastructure. There are more definitions for this bill that I think I've ever seen, particularly for this word infrastructure. I didn't realize it covered virtually everything under the sun.
Well, nobody did until Joe Biden came out and said that aspirations of the American people is one and the same as infrastructure. And if you think infrastructure is simply bridges and roads, then you're not living in reality. So when you call something aspirations, that pretty much opens the doors to cover everything in it.
Yeah, it's like just throwing everything in the kitchen sink kind of a deal. It's just, it's really amazing. I mean, I think Kristen Gillibrand said, she was trying to explain why childcare is infrastructure, and I mean, just the depths, the extent of where they're going to try to throw this in there. But it's not necessarily, the bill itself is not all that popular with all the Democrats either. I mean, I think they're even struggling with this.
They are, because it's massive spending, and it's massive spending on issues that aren't related to a core concept that Democrats have been pushing for some time, which is actual infrastructure improvements. And I think there's a lot of room to be made in the infrastructure legislation world to get some bipartisan support. But this bill isn't it, because by and large, it doesn't touch on the things that maybe a lot of Republicans and Democrats could agree upon, and that's bolstering America's roads and bridges and doing necessary improvements.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I always, every time I heard the word infrastructure, mentioned in a political context, I always kind of cringed. But, when I look back, I think that, the whole idea of roads and bridges, what we traditionally think is infrastructure, maybe a few other things, thrown in there, that probably is one of those issues that can garner some of the biggest bipartisan support, because there probably isn't a state, or in a city in the country somewhere that could not use some federal funding to help repair roads and bridges and things like that have been neglected for a number of years now. But Biden is he's just kind of taken this a little bit too far, don't you think?
Oh, it's ridiculous. And, infrastructure, real infrastructure funding usually gets tossed onto the end of a bill as a pork project, right? They come in ways that are completely unrelated to the big piece of legislation that makes the news. Lawmakers just slide in an amendment here or there, hoping that they get some road improvement monies in certain bills. But here comes a big supposed infrastructure project that does more for child care and zoning laws, which is curious because affordable housing development being pushed in an infrastructure bill is ridiculous when you consider that affordable housing is something that is done at the local levels of governance, right? That's where you get with your developers and you do kind of board of supervisor and zoning board trades with your developers to build X amount of affordable housing for X amount of luxury housing. But now here comes this infrastructure bill pushing regulations onto local developers and local governments, which is way beyond what the federal government is supposed to be doing anyhow.
Yeah, wasn't there something in there too about like home care? I mean, like for the elderly or something like that. Once again, I mean, look, in general, I'm for something that needs to fix that in a sense, because that's becoming a bigger and bigger burden. My wife and I went through that with my mother. We had my mother living with us for the last 12, 13 years of her life. And as she got older and more issues developed, it became, a much heavier burden of trying to figure out how to take care of her here in the home. But once again, labeled as infrastructure, there are other paths to try to solve this issue, but it's not under an infrastructure spending kind of a thing like this. And would we have been here either too? To me, also one of the problems with a lot of these things is just that, roads and bridges, I thought, should have been taken care of or funded mostly through the gas tax and these other transportation. But maybe you've seen it too. Maybe you haven't seen it. I don't know. My experience is that I see a lot of states that raided their transportation trust funds and used them on other things, left them high and dry. And so now the federal government comes in here. But I mean, how much spending can the government afford at this stage anyway?
Yeah, that's a great point. I live in Virginia, and just over the last couple decades, the rating of the transportation fund was a regular item of coverage in local media. And states actually treat transportation funds like the federal government does the Social Security funds, right? They call it a lockbox, but it's anything but. And, with this infrastructure bill, which we can't afford, there's no way we can afford it. And raising the corporate taxes to pay for this is just really a disaster waiting to happen, because of course what will happen in turn is that prices on consumers will rise. So it's basically saying a tax on citizens of America without calling it a tax. So what's going to happen with this bill is it's going to go to the Senate, and the Senate is going to tear it up, but they're not going to be able to get rid of all the unconstitutional, overly burdensome provisions onto taxpayers. So the goalpost is going to be moved a little bit farther to the left, which I think is the Democrat Party's intent with this bill. They know they won't get everything in the Senate. They know that a lot of what they're pushing for will be tossed out, but they'll get some. They'll get enough to open the doors even farther in this country to radical environmentalism, to socialist policies, to far left agendas.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that really what is coming down to in the Biden administration? Is that it's the far left pushing this agenda, and basically Biden saying more or less, yes, okay, well, yeah, yes, this, I don't know where he's really done much of any pushback against the squad type of people, the Bernie Sanders wing. He seems to be saying, let's go ahead and see, we'll see if anybody salutes this flag enough, and we'll let it go. But it's just outrageous to see, what we're seeing.
Yeah, Joe Biden's the puppet, right? I mean, I think we've had this conversation before. I think all of America has had this conversation, and very few deny that fact that Joe Biden is sort of the figurehead in the White House. The Democrat Party ran him because he has name recognition. He has a long history in D.C., and more to their favor, he's weak and easily manipulated, which is what's taking place in the White House on a daily basis. We're seeing the far left policies steamrolled through the White House. Joe Biden, even if he were to resist, his resistance is good for maybe 24 hours, and then he needs a nap. So this is basically the left's, total unicorn in a package that they have in Joe Biden. They get almost 4 years more to push through the far left visions they've had for America for decades.
Let me ask you this, though. This is something just on the infrastructure side, and with the transportation trust fund, tend to be being robbed. I mean, I think that's a great analogy. Comparing it to the Social Security. Yeah, we know how that's gone on for decades. What about these things like Governor Hogan in Maryland has been pushing this PPP, private public partnership, trying to work on roads in Maryland, for which his term will end in January 2023. I don't see how he's going to get this project off the ground fully before the Democrats just shut him down, by then or shortly thereafter. But do you think that's doing things like that is viable? I know in Virginia you've got there was a lot of controversy about the toll road and the variable rates and everything like that. I mean, what's your take on this?
I don't like public-private partnerships for something as basic as roads. And here's why. We pay tax dollars. We pay a lot of money to taxes for government to provide certain services. And roads are certainly one service that should be a core basic function of government. We're not talking about entitlement spending here. We're not talking about spending for one segment of population over another. We're talking about basic roadways. And when you start to bring in, first off, we pay tons of taxes, so roads should be regularly maintained anyhow. The states abuse the funding they receive in terms of tax dollars, so they never have enough, supposedly, to do roads. So what they do is they come up with so-called creative solutions to raise money, which leads us into this whole hot lane thing that we have in Virginia, and as you go up and down the Northeast, especially on the coast. And I don't like that, because we already pay for roads, so why do we have to pay more to travel the roads that we already pay for? I don't even like HOV lanes, because that's just creating a separation of those who do something that the government wants you to do versus those who don't. And since we're the ones paying for the roads, the HOV lanes and the hot lanes are just roads that are just set aside now by the government for the government's select few.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was just having a conversation about HOV lanes with another friend of mine who lives out in Virginia, and I was saying that he was mentioning how a lot of times HOV lanes, you're not traveling a whole lot faster than the other lanes, and I said, in some states, in some areas, you have the quote privilege of riding in the HOV lanes, but sometimes you're actually paying on top of that. You're paying a toll to ride them on top of that. It's like, this is nuts.
In Virginia, we actually have an out-of-country company. Australia actually collects the revenues for 20 years from Virginia's hot lanes. And so the money that you pay to ride the hot lanes in Virginia, it doesn't even go to your local governments. It doesn't even stay locally. It goes to this private company in Australia for 20 years.
Was that Macquarie or something like that? Or
I forget the name of it. I covered it extensively when I was in local news,
yeah.
but I can't remember now.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're one of the bigger companies that has gone to states. I think they took over maybe in Chicago and in Indianapolis or Indiana somewhere too, where they pay some money up front to the state, and then they take it over for the next 20 years and collect the tolls. And then in that regards, like, you have no idea how high those tolls can go as a result of that. You've now lost complete control of that road, in essence. All right. Other thing too. So the ongoing border crisis. So we're now at, I think, day 21, where we really haven't seen anything of Vice President Harris. This is really puzzling. Here's Joe Biden handing over this. Theoretically, it could have been a massive task, of an opportunity for Harris to do something there, and at least on with optics, to make some hay here and kind of set herself and say, I'm going to go down there and I'm going to solve this problem or whatever. She didn't even have to say anything. She could just look like she's doing something, but she hasn't even visited the border. I mean, I guess she's talked to Obrador, on the phone and things like that. But on the other hand, I've seen pictures of her in the White House sitting next to Biden when they're doing other things. It's like, where's Kamala? What the heck is going on? Things don't seem to be getting any better. We've been talking about this for weeks. I don't think we're any better off than we were a few weeks ago.
No, we aren't. But this was the strategy, right? So the border issue was really heating up on the White House tail. If you watched the press conferences that Jen Psaki put out, you even had the mainstream media. You had NBC. You had others on the left side of the media asking, what's up with the border? And so it was becoming a very hot issue for the White House to handle. And save from going back and returning to the Donald Trump days where they actually secured the border, the White House really didn't have much action they could take to get away from this heat that they were feeling from the press. So what they did is they booted from Joe Biden to Kamala Harris, and they made it seem like she's going to go to the border. She's going to do some investigations into what's going on, and she'll be back to address everybody's answers, everybody's questions. And so she took off on the road. She did the road trip to the border, supposedly. And we haven't seen her, we haven't heard from her. But this is, politically speaking, very strategic of the White House, because now whenever somebody has a question about the border, all they have to do is point to Kamala Harris is dealing with it, and she'll report back to you as soon as she's back in town, as soon as she has the information. So they get to sidestep the heat and meanwhile point to Kamala Harris as if they're doing something. And really, Kamala Harris, she only has to stay on the road to keep all the border stuff at bay, right? Politically speaking, it's very smart.
Yeah, I'm not really sure where the heck she is. I guess they have to publish an official schedule of hers, as long as it's not really confidential type of stuff like that. I think those things do become public record, the public schedule part of that. But it's just so curious that, with the media and the general love affair the media has for the Biden administration, we're still in the 100 days, period for the Biden administration, is that, and how much they really love or seem to love Kamala Harris. To me, it seems like you show up at the border, you do photo ops, you throw out a few toss away lines, bash Trump or whatever. You don't have to even say anything that's really a substantive or giving away your policy. Don't even have to take any questions necessarily. Make it short. And so it's like the media, the White House can say, look, Kamala's on the border. She's fixing the problem. We don't get that. We have no idea what's going. And your point is right, though. It's like this is a way for them to sidestep it. They point the finger at Kamala. But we don't know. It is kind of like, was it you or somebody else that said, this guy, where in the world is, Carmen Sandiego, kind of a thing like this, is where in the world is Kamala Harris? We don't really know what the heck's going on. For someone that I thought as a vice president, I was led to believe that she was going to have a relatively high profile, because theoretically, I think a lot of us thought they were prepping her to take over for Biden, sooner rather than later. She has been kind of non-existent, particularly since she's been given this role.
Which makes you wonder, how bad is it really at the border then? Because they can't even put Kamala Harris at the border for a few pictures, right? Because your point is valid. Why doesn't she just go to the border and do an Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, cry some crocodile tears and show some hugs of children and so forth, and talk about how this Joe Biden administration is just going to fix the problem? But they can't even do that. So it begs the question, how bad is it really there that they can't even stand to send her to the border for a couple of PR photo shots?
Yeah, where's the media on this? I mean, you mentioned about, there were some questions earlier at press conferences, but it seems that the media is not really paying much attention to this now. They kind of highlighted it for a little while, didn't really get any answers. Biden administration come and says, well, they gave them that show around. I think you kind of compared it to being in China. I would have also said North Korea. They had a minder there with them, going around there. You could only be in certain places. But it seems a lot of those stories have quieted down, at least with the liberal media.
Yeah, where's the media on so much, right? I mean, this is the reality of the world that we're living in today, that the media in America is part and parcel of pushing this far left agenda. They don't do their jobs except when Donald Trump or another Republican is in the White House. Otherwise, they're basically water carriers for the far left. And this is yet another example of how the media is working in collaboration with the Democrat Party, with this White House, to silence and stifle the truth.
Yeah. All right. So last subject here, last topic, something that is probably near and dear to your heart, vaccination passports, because you talked about this. This is an interesting subject because they're trying to figure out. I mean, the governments are trying to figure out, how do we deal with this? Because the record keeping on this, I really have no idea how this is all really supposed to function, based on the fact that we've had all these people being vaccinated all over the country in all kinds of different situations. I got a J&J shot on Friday, and I've got a little card, and I guess I'll keep it. I'm not sure what I'm really supposed to do with it necessarily there. I don't know how it gets recorded anywhere. One of the other things too is that I thought I was going to have to at least present my insurance card, so my insurance company knew that I was being vaccinated, but it's just a driver's license. I've never given any insurance information. So I don't know what's going on here, but talk about vaccine passports. And I saw an op-ed piece the other day by Scott Gottlieb, who was pushing for vaccination passports. Kind of give me the lowdown here.
Yeah, well, I stand 180 degrees opposed to vaccine passports. It just, I think it's a horrible idea. I think it cedes the government too much control, and the potentials for abuse are just so far reaching. And you have to have a whole lot of trust in government to believe that vaccine passports won't lead eventually, and believe it or not, sooner than believed, down a path of unintended consequences. If we hand the government the right to basically track us, not just on vaccine passports, but through technology, also through the contact tracing apps that work hand in hand with the sort of vaccine passport system. If we hand government the ability to track us that way, what's going to happen when the next pandemic happens? What's going to happen when the next health emergency arises? And more than that, are we going to seriously put private businesses in charge of checking each and every free American citizen at the door for a particular vaccine or a particular medical or health treatment as a condition of entry? This is what they're doing in New York now. If you want to go to Madison Square Garden, if you want to go to the Barclays Center, and chances are it'll come soon enough if you just want to go into any retail store in New York. You have to show proof of vaccination, or you have to show proof that you have tested negative for the coronavirus. And I am so disheartened that so many American citizens think this is a good idea to get back to some semblance of normalcy, because I think if you sign on to this, that is going to open the floodgates for government and private businesses to work in collaboration to limit the free movement of free American citizens.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's right. I mean, that's one of the beauties of this country is our ability to move freely about the country. I mean, we have driver's licenses that we need to be able to prove that we're competent, at least to drive a car, and you need federal ID for a lot of different things, and I understand that. But I just think this is a slippery slope to get to the vaccination passport. I mean, yeah, I mean, unintended consequences. Absolutely. I mean, we're not living in China. We're not living in North Korea and some of the countries, where you are, you're pretty carefully tracked about a lot of different things. And if, in data in the hands of the government, there's certain bits of data, pieces of data that we've kind of said, yeah, you've got our tax returns. Okay. So about us and what, how our kind of economic profile more or less is and things like that. But boy, the idea that I give them even more information, no, I'm not interested in that at all. And I don't know. I just fear for what this is becoming here. But and just think, I mean, yeah, I mean, you mentioned the stores, so then you're also telling people on the streets, like, so those people have been vaccinated, or they kind of passed the test or whatever. I don't know. It also creates classes of people too. It just kind of that don't in people's mind that don't really need to be done. I mean, we should treat each other equally if we see each other on the street. To be maybe somebody dresses better than somebody else, and you can say something about that. But then to know that the store will only accept you, or a dining establishment because you have been vaccinated or you tested negative, that just sends the wrong message, in my opinion.
And, you raised the point of China, and it's a good point, because it leads to what I think is the bigger problem with the vaccine passports. It's a mindset shift that is taking place in our country already under the coronavirus, where instead of individualism and individual choice, we are being conditioned to think of the greater good of the state, of the population as a whole, before our own needs or wants. And in some respects, that tails with Christianity, right? You're supposed to think of others before self. You sacrifice self for others. But when it's the government making that argument, that's where the danger arises. And that's where you turn from a free society based on individualism, based on rights coming from God, to a country that is more akin to China, where it's about the state, the collective, where it's communism. And so if you think back over the year of the coronavirus, in so many ways, the mindset shift has been subtly seeping into America's society, into our culture, and into our politics, where we have signed on to accepting the idea that we as individuals have more a responsibility to care for our neighbors than we do on taking a certain medical treatment or refusing to take a certain medical treatment for ourselves and for our children. So that is the real slippery slope that we need to keep in mind. It's the loss of individualism and it's the embrace of collectivism that's the real danger here.
All right. I don't think I can top that. I think I better leave it there. That was great. That was excellent. That was excellent. That was great. Yeah, because I agree with you wholeheartedly on this. All right. Well, Cheryl, thank you once again for joining me today. I love talking with you and just kind of picking your brain on these subjects. You're a font of knowledge and wisdom, and we just always appreciate it. Thanks for all the wonderful work you do also at the time. So hopefully our viewers here that come and go will be able to make sure they check in on the paper as well and check into your podcast. Bold and Blunt. Did I have it right?
Excellent. Yes, that is the name. Thank you.
All right. So thank you once again for joining me. Thank everybody out there for joining us. And then we will see you again next week.